have our planning commission chair here as well, E over here. He can speak to this probably even better than me, but when you are when you're evaluating it, it actually requires that the council be impartial and be making a decision and involved in helping to reject a project that I don't think, well, the applicants were pretty surprised we rejected, but we were able to because it required a legislative change before.
Locale, and then like immediately, you know, one side of Greenberg and Olson and all that stuff is business, and then you know the big empty lot's been forever empty, and then suddenly you have a house. You have like 3 houses before you get to 90 or whatever.
Right.
So you know, so that kind of marry that together is what besides the people that were.
Yeah. I mean, I'll say change is hard. The other part of that I mean, I think is lost on people sometimes is that Oregon, you know, Oregon has land use rules. Now this is kind of stepping back from what I was talking about earlier, but the whole premise of Oregon land, because I was young enough at the beginning of that I don't know all the history, and I didn't live through all of it. I lived through the parts after the mid 90s really where I was paying attention, but it's really unchanged. So the plans that were put in place in, I think it's 1973, are what we're still living with now, and it focuses density, and that pushes change in sometimes ways that people are uncomfortable with. But we also don't have urban sprawl. Yeah, I mean that's what you get. That's the positive you get out of this approach. And if you've ever been somewhere where there's urban sprawl, it's kind of shocking.
What would your definition of urban sprawl, particularly here?
Well, if we had urban sprawl, which we don't, but if we did, because it's been prevented since the 70s, but if we did, it would mean, have you ever driven from Tiger to Hillsborough on the back roads?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay, so it would mean that out there to say 5 miles outside of Tiger and 5 miles before you get to Hillsborough, I'm kind of rounding, but there's spots where you could be about 5 miles from each. Just randomly, someone will have turned their farm 20 years ago into a tract of 30 homes, just out in the middle of nowhere.
Salt Lake City area is a good example.
Almost everywhere else is an example. And my wife actually, someone who struggled with why we have our planning the way it was, and she didn't really understand urban sprawl until we were visiting a place in Michigan. So we were visiting my extended family in Michigan, and one of them lived in one of the. So let's talk about what. So the council just took some. I don't know that we made any friends among the city staff with this, but there needs to be a review and revisions of our urban agriculture. That's actually the part of the city code that describes all this stuff. It's called urban agriculture. The staff had presented a plan. The council said, no, that's not fast enough. First of all, if you're a sitting city councilor, they've supposed to have been working on this since 2016 or 2017, and we've continuously pushed, we being the council, have continuously pushed for it to get addressed, and it's continued to slip, and we actually said, that's not going to work. And so the staff team and the department leader for that department heard the message loud and clear at the council meeting, because I talked to the city manager the next day, and he goes, oh, he's already all over it. We're working on it. We're going to take the work up this year and get it done. So I would encourage you both to participate and carefully kind of monitor. And Carol, oh, you're over there now. Can you make sure that these two folks are put, and anyone else that wants to be for that matter, but are put on the interested parties list for the urban agriculture code revisions?
Yeah, and is there something next week on urban agriculture?
I have an RSVP that I can get your information and take a poll.
Okay. So probably in 6 to 9 months. But this is the beginning of the process with staff asking questions about, you know, what is it that everybody's concerned about. So you already gave me some of that feedback. Like, nobody needs more than 6 chickens. I heard you say that. Nobody needs a rooster. You know,
Why does it take so long to make a decision? I mean, that's a pretty obvious problem.
what decision are we talking about? Well, there's a whole, I mean, there's a whole, yeah, there's a lot more urban agriculture going than just that one. Hi, Mr. Angelini. Good to see you. Oh. All right.
Tiger's vision statement of the water lead, and also I'm interested in knowing Tiger's relationship with the city in terms of like land use and what's happening in that realm.
Okay. Are you?
Yeah, I know there's like a walk.
Our vision had been, and it's been slightly modified, that will be added to the open growth boundary. We have an active application as a city to bring that, this Tigard side of that is called South River Terrace. So we have an application in the metro right now to bring that part of River Terrace into Tigard. It's a very complex area to develop, both for King City and for Tigard, because of stormwater actually. The stormwater, there's a lot of terrain in that area, and stormwater has to be moved really with gravity, and that just makes that area really it makes it complicated from a stormwater perspective. And King City needs us to. I mean, we actually provide King City doesn't have its own really public works department. We provide. I mean, they pay for it, but we provide all their water, sewer, stormwater work even within King City. But they've got some of it's got to run through Tiger to get dealt with. So we're coordinating very closely if that's the question.
Yeah, I'm just curious because it seemed like Tiger was eventually gonna, take over King City in terms of like it sounds like they're already doing a lot of
Well, it's a zone city. I guess on April Fool's Day, a couple weeks ago, I did King City
relationship with that, with all the instructions that are
You mean the one that's going up Greenberg now?
Well, aren't they bringing from Roy Rogers up Shoals to Beaverton? That big water line?
Yeah, that's not our project, but yeah, the Tiger, Long Valley District, I think, is doing that along with the, that's a huge project. In fact, I'm glad our water, given what's going on with inflation, I'm glad our water project is done, because I think they're in for a rude awakening about how much it's actually going to cost to finish that project. I think we were lucky we constructed ours when we did.
When will they be tearing up Shoals? They're going to bring it all the way from Roy Rogers Road through.
Yeah, that I don't know, but our staff can definitely get that. So Carol, the question there is about what's the project schedule and the street impacts for the TDWD and Hillsborough Water Project? And that will be ongoing. I mean, I think even if you see some impacts now, you'll see others later. It's a major project. This side of the room's been very quiet for a while. Who's got questions or comments? Brandon?
When you talk about annexation or bringing in other areas, I find it kind of funny that River Terrace is a Tiger project, but I've had multiple conversations with people who don't really live in the city because they have a Beaverton or Sherwood address or whatever the streets.
Yeah.
It's kind of a funny thing. You build these grand neighborhoods and people part of our community.
It's a confusing identity problem. I mean, it's another thing my wife just never has come to grasp. She just doesn't make sense to her that the Beaverton School District covers a third of Tigard too. In fact, where we're sitting now, if there was a house right here, Michael, you'd know this, or Brandon, maybe you would, because you both live near here, but don't you go to Beaverton schools from right here?
Done about that here, yeah.
I'm pretty sure. You know, so who knows the answer to why that's the case?
Post office.
The school district doesn't have to do with the post
Oh, I
office.
see, but see, that's why.
Oh, yeah. Why do you think that the school districts are not aligned with the cities?
I remember years ago this came up before, and I can't remember what the
Can't remember
answer
the answer.
I'm just gonna take a guess that it had to do with balancing out the student load between various schools.
It's actually even more basic than that. The school districts existed before the cities.
Yeah, in the counties, like 185th used to be the dividing line between Hillsborough and Beaverton.
Right. So it like so the cities did their thing, but so it just it created this patchwork of this process. But to your point in River Terrace, there are places where you currently live in Tigard. So track with me on this. You live in Tigard. You go to Beaverton schools, and you have a Sherwood mailing address.
Cool.
That's really.
And you wonder why they're confused about where they live or what city they live in. There's a lot of reasons to be confused. So, Brandon, I guess I'm not sure I totally answered your question. Are you asking why it's down? Well, maybe next year, then we're tired. So that's an interesting piece of feedback. Carol, I think if you wouldn't mind marking that for me, I'd like to talk to the city manager and maybe Kenny about the sort of community identity part of that. That's a good call out.
Because I would say that if you're in Tigard, you know, because you have the campaign stripes on the poles, but River Terrace was designed to put different.
Yeah.
So even the street signs are completely different.
Yeah, no, it's a point well taken.
Well, I remember 2 mayors before you. There was a post office trying to make it Tigard.
I was wondering if that was going to come up.
Yeah, I mean, that's been.
I argued with someone on the phone that he tried. She might have actually gotten the state legislature to pass something that told the federal government to change it, but they haven't. I mean, I think it's just hard to get, especially when you've got such little time. Like this year, I went to Washington, D.C. in April to lobby for 2 things. Actually 3, but 2 major and one somewhat smaller one. And, and those were, one was a $3.2 million ask and another was a $2 million ask for congressionally directed funding, i.e. earmarks, that's the old word for this, for projects. And we've made good progress on those. Congresswoman Bonamici put our $3.2 million ask for Hall Boulevard in her top 15 list, which we didn't think was going to happen because guess what? Next year she's not going to be our congressperson. Right. We got a new district, so we were like, oh, this is a long shot. But I'd be, if I have to choose between a fight over the post office or getting them the financial investments, it's just not where, unfortunately. I guess we could all decide that's more important, but if I've got 5 minutes of her time and I can talk about 2 projects, that's just not been what we prioritized. You could tell me if you think that's wrong.
Can you tell us what was the third not so big deal one?
Oh, it just wasn't as much money. I wouldn't say it wasn't as important, but we had 3 asks. So one was for Universal Plaza, funding the 2nd phase of Universal Plaza, some specific parts of it that we don't have funded right now. And then I told you about the other one on Hall Boulevard and investments there. You might have seen me and Congresswoman Bonamici on the news last week about that project. And then the 3rd one was temporary funding for actually what Brandon does in the police department, one of our community service officers, for some additional houseless support and follow-up.
Which is not a little deal.
No, but it was a smaller amount of money because it was a short-term they don't, I mean, honestly, the federal government doesn't like funding things that are like ongoing expenses just in general. They much prefer to fund things you can build and that are here, and, you know, Congressman Bonamici can come out and be like, look at this great thing we built, which, you know, having a community service officer doing outreach kind of behind the scenes where it's not a built thing and there's ongoing funding implications is something they're less excited about. So, though it is on Senator Wyden and Senator Merkley's list, so we got it on there. We'll see. I don't know if it'll stay. Again, if I have to pick, I'm going to pick the bigger dollar amount that'll have, you know, a capital impact. You guys all, I can't tell, you're looking like you're 30 minutes after a turkey dinner, but did am I just
Talk about downtown development. Yeah. Personally, I spent 3 years developing a plot for the plaza.
Yep.
I don't know if you're aware or not, but the system is wired to have chimes.
Yes.
Clocks and chimes. But we were told no because it would be too loud, even though it sits adjacent to the building.
Yeah, both Richard Shavy and former city councilman Henderson I would say contact Kenny Asher, the community development director, and probably every year or two about that topic. And we actually gave them feedback in the last couple of months that was pretty simple. I guess I can give you the same info. If the Chamber of Commerce, the downtown businesses, and the broader town community are all that's the feedback we've given thus far. We've not seen groups of stakeholders that we'll help figure out how to make it happen.
Speaking of downtown, what happened to the bakery recently? I know COVID happened, but.
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that. Carol, do you know the answer to that? What happened to the bakery downtown that we were supposed to get?
Pre-COVID, remember?
Yeah, I don't know what's going on.
I mean, COVID may just be the answer, but I don't know. I actually don't know that.
It's not happening very fast.
We could find out what our economic development manager knows. So his name is Lloyd Purdy, and Carol can take your info and get a response to you on that. Please copy me too. I'd like to know the answer. That happens with some frequency meetings. I'm like, you guys asked a good question. I don't know the answer. We'll get it, but I want to know the answer.
I have a question about Hall Boulevard and exactly which sections will be transferred to the city of Tigard as part of that.
Well, that's still, so what you're asking about is really the sort of end state of a transfer from ODOT to the city. The sections that have been being studied the most closely are between Durham Road and 99W, though there's been a relook at some areas somewhat north of 99W. And you know, the win is not. I mean, we got to figure out how to get it in the condition into a reasonable condition. Right now, it's like a house that hasn't had a new roof in 50 years, and has 2 inches of moss on it. Like that's the condition it's in now, and it is unreasonable for the city to assume the amount of financial liability associated with that. And by liability, I'm meaning like to bring it up to even some reasonable state of good repair. Once that's scoped out, we know how much it's going to cost, which we're getting there now. Like how much it's going to cost, then we got to figure out there are projects that are happening now, and then there will be more that's got to be done, and with the state, we got to figure out how to fund some of that, or at least to get it so there's not 2 inches of moss on it.
They fix it first, then you acquire it, right?
Yeah, though it might not be a new roof, right? It'll be, or maybe it'll be a new roof, but it'll be a bargain roof, not a.
Well, I
Put it on
remember.
top of the existing
Yeah,
roof.
Yeah, I mean, I remember, again, pre-COVID, by maybe 3 years, when they did thing was they didn't last more than 6 months.
So
So,
that is not a, so fixing potholes, so things, let's talk about Tigard roads for a minute that we.
The senior center has a long-term lease, right?
Well, this affordable housing developer is gonna have a long-term lease too.
For $1.
I think so. I don't, it's not anything more than that. It might be free, but it's cheap.
One of my concerns is the parking up there. Where are these 50 additional people, assuming that probably half of them will have a car? And there's no bus service.
Well, there's bus service close by. I mean, there's bus service on Hall.
Yes.
And then it's not that far to the Tigard Transit Center. But the group that's developing this is their business. I mean, they're a nonprofit, but this is what they do. They develop affordable senior housing, and they do it very well. They also, because of that, they have data, and they know that the number of people that they project will have a vehicle that live in that property with the income restrictions that we'll have is like 20%. It's not a lot.
Question about that. In the affordable housing, do they just have one bedroom for a senior? Because I think some seniors need more than one bedroom, like 2 bedrooms. And what I understand is for the affordable housing, they're just doing 1 bedroom.
Well, I would say, generally speaking, in the affordable housing projects I've been in Tigard that have been recently constructed, there's 1, 2, and 3 bedroom. What the plan is for the senior housing center, any of the staff that are here remember the exact, we can get that information too.
I'd like to know.
I don't think they're all 1 bedroom. I don't think they're all studios or anything like that. But there's always there's a need, to your point, there's different needs. You know, if you're one individual, 1 bedroom with a generous space for your living may be acceptable. If you are a senior who's living with a couple other people, then that may not be adequate. Michael,
Did anybody answer your gas smell?
I haven't heard one
'Cause
yet.
I think they just painted these.
And it smells like gas?
Well, paint usually has an odor to it.
This is very, at least to me, very natural gas. I'll give it a whiff. Hold on a minute. I mean, that's not what I'm smelling.
When you said it, I thought I smelled propane or something, but
Yeah.
I don't smell.
Everything was just done.
But my question was, the question of, so they shut down the senior center because of this project that you're talking about. Has there been any discussion about finding an alternative for some of the programs they were doing at the senior center?
Yes, and I think you've been involved in some of those communications about that. There's active conversation with the church next door. They're very interested. The city's been working with them, trying to work through details around that. And then Meals on Wheels, who really operates they operate the senior center, or they have been the operator of the senior center. I think is also in discussion with one other site, and I think over the summer are going to be using, at least through August, are going to be using some of the St. Anthony facilities for that.
but that's all temporary.
That's temporary, and so would the church that's next door. Once the construction's completed, then they'll go back to using the senior center itself. Michael, does that answer your question? Or question?
I haven't heard anything. I just asked the question.
Got it. And I see someone back there with a mask on. I don't even know. I don't know. I didn't see you earlier. Do you have some questions or thoughts?
You're covering the bases.
What was that?
You're covering quite the bases.
Oh, I'm covering the bases. Okay.
Are you excited for the Moon Festival?
I am very excited. I'm excited on a bunch of fronts, including the fact that we're going to be celebrating the Tigard's 60th birthday during that, since we didn't get to do it because of COVID. I was pretty those that were around for some of those meetings, I was pretty grumpy about our canceled events and the lack of our fireworks display that had been planned. So I'm
Is there one this year?
fireworks. Oh yeah.
Oh.
Where will it be?
It will be back at the traditional, like the Tiger launching from Cook Park over the high school. The middle of Millen Drive parade is back on.
I'd ask what day.
You'd ask what day? I think
Oh, I know that one. I'm driving in it.
July 4th.
Not the Pride one, no. You got the wrong one. So I have another thing to throw at you, just totally bizarre.
Bring it on.
I mean, nobody out, I'm not taking anybody's space, right?
Hey, we've given, there's been ample opportunity, so.
I
So-
didn't hear what you said.
Oh, I haven't said it yet. So yesterday it came out the news that by 2035 they feel the population of the planet. We technically haven't hit 8 billion people living on the planet, but 2035 now they came out with 9 billion people.
Wow.
I know. So I was just wondering, as you know, planners of a city, I guess you guys didn't hear that news because I'm just curious. What does that mean for urban? I mean, all the stuff we've talked about. It's like, okay.
I'm trying to reconcile that with what, so at the U.S. Conference of Mayors meeting that I was at earlier this week, as I was referencing earlier, we also had, we had a demographer and an economist speaking about what's going on in the labor force and the economy and, you know, what you're saying, I have no doubt is true in the world. But that is not what the U.S. trajectory is looking like.
Oh, okay.
In fact, and a lot of this is sort of, you know, as baby boomers unfortunately begin to know, you know, be less and less with us, so you're probably aware, unless you just don't, if you haven't been reading news in 30 years, maybe you wouldn't know this, but you know what's been going on in Japan around growth for the last 30 years, or lack thereof. We're kind of headed on that trajectory as a country. So I don't know exactly what that means, but I hadn't heard that put in quite the quantitative way that I had at this conference. And I probably need to read up more, but you know, the person that was speaking is like, used to work at the Federal Reserve and is the head economist for JP Morgan Chase, one of the largest banks in the country. So I'm not really going to question his, you know, 35 or 40 years of experience at this, but you know, I think I can trust that. And he's presenting to hundreds of mayors at this conference, but you know, it got me thinking. Like I don't like, and how do I reconcile that with 9 billion people on the planet? I mean, it means there's going to be more people on the planet, but they may not be here.
Yeah, well, that's kind of the question mark, isn't it?
Yeah.
Things that doesn't take into account, I guess, are migration, right? So
That was actually one of his other points, was that part of what's going on in our labor market is, and what he was actually saying from an economist perspective, our country needs to figure out immigration too. Because traditionally, when you have these kinds of economic challenges, and I'm talking labor force, he's not as concerned about, I mean, I'm not going to talk about inflation, and that's not what I'm meaning right now about our economic conditions. I'm talking more about labor force and those kinds of market forces that, you know, traditionally the way a strong economy deals with that is by importing talent or people. And we're not, that's not in play right now. And so I think he's just making the point, again, this is like economist guy speaking from economist world, like that's just not generally good for the economy. This is, you know, long term was his point. So like we need to figure it out.
My parents represent two eras of those pushed integrations between each scenarios. Yeah, it's really fascinating because we're kind of heading that way again.
Yeah,
So it should
for
be
sure.
interesting.
lot of interesting forces at play right now that are competing in some ways, and yeah, it'll be interesting to see how it all plays out.
Where do you usually have your meetings once a month?
These meetings? So that a fascinating question, and has changed dramatically through. So traditionally, let's talk before COVID. Before COVID, we would usually go to a pub or a coffee house, and we'd be indoors, and we didn't know what COVID was, so we didn't have masks on, and we would just sit and chat. We would do those, they're typically on Thursday nights. This one is happening tonight because I was at the U.S. Conference of Mayors meeting that I was just referencing last week. And so normally they're on the first Thursday?
Yep.
First Thursday. They're on a Thursday. I needed to check that it's the first. But generally the first Thursday of the month. And we advertise in a lot of different venues. But I think, Carol, do you still send the thing that tells the interested people when this is happening? Like, do you have that list still?
I would need, yeah.
Like Leon asked for it, right? Every time?
Right.
So could you add them to the same communication? The answer is we move it around. We've been, well, during COVID, we did it online for almost 2 years straight. It wasn't even on Zoom. It was less interactive than that. Zoom probably would have been an upgrade. It was kind of one way. The video was of me on Facebook, and then we would take questions by people typing into the platforms. Now we've expanded the platforms further so that it's on more social media and other media platforms. But then I really wanted to get back to in person. This is important to me. This is a great turnout, by the way. I don't know if it's the weather, we got good advertising, but this is more people than we've had since probably the first one I held after I became mayor. That one was a packed room at Symposium Coffee. But this might be second place to that, or first place. So I appreciate the attendance, and maybe the good weather played into that. But we've done them lots of different ways. Last month we were in the library, but in distance. So we were in the big room in the front of the library, and then there might have been this many people, but half of them were city employees that were concerned about bargaining. So this is a little more community-based. Not that that's unimportant, but it didn't represent a bunch of community members number-wise. So, and then tonight we were here. Carol, thanks for I assume you're the one who picked the location and planned this?
I did. I have a question for you for July. Do you know if you still are available that first week?
I'm not.
Okay, so it might be the second Thursday.
Well, remember, July 1st is a Friday.
July 1st is a Friday, so
And
it'll
Monday
be
is the 4th, so.
Yeah, Monday's the 4th. Yeah, I will not be here that week.
Up to 4th.
So we will need to do that the following week, presumably on Thursday if there's already another event
But
then.
we'll try in at an outdoor location.
Yeah, I think this worked well. Maybe a little hotter in July. We used to have a little bit of, snacks and treats. Can we try to do that again?
Okay.
Oh, a symposium you did, yeah.
Yeah, symposium.
Warren had a trailer.
Or maybe, I guess if it's 100 degrees in July, we should probably at least have water. I'm hoping for a warm July in August. We'll see.
Sure, we'll have snacks.
Okay. Has this been helpful, by the way? Okay.
I know I can't always attend, but I wanted to tonight.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you
This is
coming.
the first time we've ever heard of it.
Okay. Yeah, John Cook, the prior mayor, was doing them too. I think he did them just as consistently, didn't he, once a month? I don't know about before that, though. That was something he started, wasn't it, Carol?
Yes, he started it.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking, you're doing what? You're just going to sit there and let anybody ask you anything? And he's,
Yeah.
good for you, that's great.
And he used to have his iPad with a little
Yeah,
flame.
he would play a fire. I did that one time and it drained my iPad battery from like 90 to 10 in like an hour and a half. I was like, I'm not doing that again. It just didn't seem like a good, I mean, I love the aesthetic, I guess, but I'm not going to drain my iPad battery.
I did appreciate the Phantom Creek House video with the light and fireplace.
Oh yeah, that was, here's some tech folks that were involved in
It's not
that.
a real fire, it's all special effects.
Oh yeah, real fire. You better get better at your fibbing before you run for office.
What's going on with the Phantom Creek House? I know there was talk about opening it up for rentals, but then I think COVID shut that down too.
Yeah, and Michael, that's a broader question about, I mean, you're asking it about Phantom Creek House, but it's actually been a question about even the library, the Burgess Room in the front of the library, all those community spaces, and, you know, I actually don't know what the current status of that is. It's been a discussion, but Carol, can we get an update on sort of community use of spaces that are outside the park system right now? That would be the Phantom Creek House, there with the fake fire that was made with lights. I don't think that's a real chimney.
It was at one time.
Well, yeah. Yes, it was at one time. Very true. All right. Other questions? I haven't done any kind of a time check. Oh wow, we're blowing through the time. I will stay longer if people have questions. I mean, I know it's 7:25 and we started a little early, but if others want to talk about other things, happy to chat, hang around. You've got just, I guess since people are here, I'll at least say that 2 individuals that are sitting here have announced that they're running for Tigard City Council, so you might want to chat with them. Carol, I should be very, very open about this. Has anyone else filed for City Council?
No, we've had another person file for mayor.
Okay, but for City Council, okay.
Nope.
So for City Council, the 2 candidates right now that have filed that are sitting here, you want to introduce yourself?
Hey everyone, my name is Jay Raj Singh. I live in the Winter Terrace community. I've been a community organizer for around 7 years in Portland, Oregon, in the Tri-Metro area. So yeah, I have my petition here.
Oh, he probably wants signatures.
Yes,
so
I do.
You don't have to vote for him if you
Yeah,
sign, but
exactly.
you need signatures to get on the ballot.
Yeah, so I still need signatures, and so I would be really grateful if I can.
He only needs 20. He might be able to get like 15 now. How many do you have now?
I have 7. So.
Okay. E, how are you doing on your signature? Well, let's have you introduce yourself.
As the stated, I'm the president of the Planning Commission. I've been on the Planning Commission for 7 years, and I was also on the Transportation Advisory Committee. And by the way, the real power of Transportation Advisory Committee is to capital improvement projects.
Yes.
And the section you were talking about actually was ranked very highly every year, but unfortunately, if the city could not find enough funding for it, it gets skipped over to the next project that they have funding for. So even though that portion of the street is ranked very highly, very important to the city, unfortunately, we just haven't found the money for that expensive portion yet. So anyway, so I'm very excited to run for city council because I think being on the planning commission for 7 years, I have a pretty good understanding of the city government, albeit mostly focused on land use. But I think I'm a quick study, so I can catch up on other part. So hopefully I'll be as knowledgeable as the mayor one day. So yeah, and I have
Can you write that down for my wife?
Yeah, and I have more than enough signature already, so I don't need any signature.
Okay, you've got your, have you turned your petition in?
I'll have to make appointment with Carol, but.
And by the way, this is actually a petition. This is some of the weirdest stuff that you don't ever know the mechanics of, at least I never knew until I was running for city council how this works. So the way this works is you get an official petition from the city and the signatures on it, once you have them, that is the petition to force yourself onto the ballot. That's the process. Sounds kind of weird, right? You would think you just go in and say, hey, I want to run for city council. Oh no, you need signatures, and it used to be 500, right?
The last I heard was 189, but maybe before that it was.
Yeah, so before we made some changes, like I was involved way before I was on the city council. I was involved in a committee to look at why people didn't run for city council. And at that time, this is like in the mid 2000s, there was no alternative option. You needed 500 signatures to run for city council. And we said, that could be a barrier. What do you think about decreasing that number? And then, the city council at the time was like, well, what about people that aren't really motivated, but they just sort of like, we said, okay, we'll charge a fee then. So now or Carol's saying it's 189 now, but there is an option to do it without money, but you can also pay $50 and get 20, and that's.
No, actually, it's just $20 and $50. We don't have that.
You don't have that one anymore?
No.
That's not what we recommended, so that's. I mean, I know. I was the chair of that group, so I'm surprised you did. Are you sure? You're probably. You're very sure.
What was the Seattle model for a bit, where each resident could donate $20 of their tax money to their candidate?
Oh, to candidates?
It's like a different reversal.
Well, in Portland is matching money, right? Like
Yeah.
you can. I think they have a maximum amount you can contribute, but if you get $10 from a person, then they give you 90 or something. I mean, it's interesting. It's a way of trying to get money out of politics to some extent. But I don't.
Now, are these two replacing the two people aren't running?
So you're going to have a lot of change on the city council this coming year, no matter what.
Oh, okay.
So I have been deemed ineligible to run for re-election. That's a complicated story that I'll only get into if you all ask about it. And John Goodhouse is term limited out of running for city council for re-election. And Council President Lube has declared that she's running for mayor against John Goodhouse, which means that she will have to resign, just as I had to when I ran for mayor. And then Councilor Liz Newton has announced she's not running for re-election. So, yeah, there's going to be a lot of change and open seats. So, if others are interested in running for city council, I just named more seats than there are people running at the moment. In case anyone's doing the algebra there.
Tiger doesn't have any awards this year, so
Yeah, it's all at large. One of those positions, I guess I should preface the replacement of Council President Lube. Presumably soon the City Council will have to figure out how it's going to fill her vacancy, because it doesn't have to necessarily be on the ballot. The council can appoint someone. I don't know what. I guess I shouldn't. I'm one member of a 5-person city council, so I should not. And we don't get to talk about city business when we're not in a council meeting. So I haven't had any conversations with anybody about what we might do, but I'd be a little surprised if it wasn't on the ballot. But if it's on the ballot, it'll probably be its own. It'll be a 2-year term to complete Council President Lube's term. So I think it'd be separate from the other 2 council positions.
That's correct.
Go, Carol. See, so Carol is responsible for a lot of things in the city.
Yeah.
And part of why I'm deferring and asking her these questions, or she's giving me that clear answer, is because one of the titles she holds is the elections officer for the city. So when these folks that are running turn in their petitions to run, she drives down to the county elections office and validates their signatures. For example, it's one of her many talents.
So did you move out of the Tiger, like on Cook Street? That way?
No, I still live in the same house. Oh, you're opening up that story?
I just, because you mentioned about, it's a long story you told us. I'm thinking, the easy one is I moved out of, like he did, he
Yeah,
moved out
no,
of
I mean,
Tiger.
I'll try to give a very abridged version of the story, and then if you want to ask even more questions, you can. But I started serving on the city council in January of 2013. We had the city charter. Good night, thanks for coming. The city charter restricts people from serving more than 2 terms as a city councilor or more than 2 terms as mayor, 4-year terms, and in no case shall anyone serve more than 12 years. I'd served 6 years when I resigned and ran for mayor, so I resigned in the middle of a term. Prior city attorney had, for reasons that were kind of not even related, they weren't related at all to this situation and happened years ago, had provided information to the council at the time about what constituted a break in service. The council's now interpreted the charters to indicate that at the time I had a multi-day break, that the prior city attorney's opinion is not, he's not even alive anymore, that is not, that's not the current interpretation of the charter, and that because I will have served 10 years at the end of this year, another term would constitute 14 years instead of 12. And there's also case law, actually it's not case law, I should be really specific about this. There's an Oregon Attorney General's opinion that involved Ted Wheeler way back before he was the mayor of Portland, but it had to do with him specifically when he was state treasurer, that you cannot serve part of a term. You can't be elected to a term that you're not eligible to serve the entire term on. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So for that reason, I am not going to be running for re-election because I'm not eligible to run for re-election. And so I will be done at the end of this year. So there will be a mayoral opening and then multiple city council openings.
Isn't there going to be a police lady? Isn't the police lady leaving as well?
Like the police chief?
I heard she was going to Tacoma.
So she was a finalist for the job in Tacoma, and she had been an assistant chief at Tacoma and knew that department inside and out. But they, in the end, ended up hiring somebody else from outside of the area.
That's good for us.
I thought it was very good for us.
Yes, I think so.
I told her that. I mean, I was unhappy. She wanted the job, and it was a department she grew up in and started as a patrol officer in. So I was rooting for her, and she's been there through. She was there through that department's been through some very difficult, extremely difficult situations that she helped lead them through as an assistant chief. And so I really wanted her to get the job for her, but I'm ecstatic for Tiger.
Yeah, I agree.
Yes, Michael.
I've got a couple of questions regarding the November elections.
Okay.
One is, why would you consider appointing somebody if there's going to be an election anyways?
Yeah, just because the charter allows both, so the council has to discuss it. I mean, you don't have a full-time mayor, right? Like I work in healthcare full-time. This is like, an extracurricular. So, there's stuff like that. There's the things about term limits that are definitely, they were unclear. Now they're more clear just because the council has now interpreted them. But they're still kind of, as you point out, I think messed up. For one, I think the biggest concern of many related to the council thing is that people that start in the city council on the cycle I started, because we have 2 councilors every 2 years that are elected. 2 positions that are elected alternating every 2 years. It just puts people that start on the cycle I was on at a disadvantage if they ever want to run for mayor. So that probably just, from a fairness and equity perspective, just kind of needs to get resolved. But there's a lot of other stuff in the charter that's just sort of either outdated or just outdated, bad. A lot of it is just stuff people didn't think through. Like, I don't think anyone ever thought that the situation that's transpiring now with the mayoral role, they definitely didn't think through this because they never would have wanted it to transpire the way that it is. And they also they wouldn't have wanted to know they had vague language in the charter with no definitions. There's no definition definitions of any of these words. So it's all just sort of like, you know, the word consecutive is used, no definition. So it just, there's a whole, the city attorney is actually now keeping a running list of stuff to deal with. And if you get elected, you'll probably be the one dealing with it. I mean, it's not going to be a charter review commission that's completed before I'm.
You're not blind.
Oh, you bet.
Yeah.
Thank you all for coming. It was
So those with strangers.